Q&A?
Sure.
Right, so
I don't know if you have to stop at 8
no, we stop at 8:30.
or... Okay.
So this is the commercial break. We'll take Q&A in about 2-3 minutes. Before that, I'll make some quick announcement for upcoming programs. And Yahya was talking about his work in that part of the region. So just on maps, we have a number of other activities coming up. Tomorrow we have a tech meetup at 2 p.m. This is for the technology discussion open to everybody. On Sunday at noon we have a work party at Redmond Park. So if you come volunteers will gather and then we go to Redmond Park and there are some work that we will be doing volunteering to keep the park clean and neat. Next Friday, October 14, at this time, we will switch gears totally. So we will switch from last week to talk about Bosnia, this week we're talking about mountains, next week we will talk about teeth or smile. So we have 3 dentists who will go and give a speech about dental health. October 16, we have our subsidiaries for free health clinic. Again, open to everybody. We have about 6 doctors who will be providing health care and consultation to anybody who needs to see a doctor. October 22nd, we are partnering with the Jewish Voice for Peace group to screen the movie Good Rose. Good Rose is a movie that was shot in Palestine and live in Palestine. And October 29, the armed POCs of America, along with us and another dozen or so religious organizations across various faith groups, is hosting a town hall in Seattle. The details on our website. The title will address the whole day conference that will talk about Islam in the public square. So effectively talking about the challenges that American Muslims are facing. So all of these programs and more is available on our website. So we can put, yes, correct? Yeah, we'll do a switch to Q&A right now. Right. Okay. So I'll pass the mic and then see if you want to maybe use this one. Okay.
First of all, I'd like to tell everyone, as a son of a mountain climber, what we're looking at and what we have the privilege to see is a real maverick and really elite of what mountaineering really is. And we should be so. Please give him a round of applause because what he has done and the overview that he's given us, it's hard for us all to really conceptualize, but you are absolutely amazing. And I'm Max's son.
Aha, thanks.
My father was a mountain
I knew his father, yeah.
Yeah, and so the question I have here, I have just 3 quick questions.
Okay.
Number 1, if you could just tell folks what it's like to be up that high and to be without oxygen and what it physically does to your body. And then secondly, if folks are interested in mountain climbing, what should they do and what would be the determining factors whether they're really cut out for this? Because when you started doing this, when my dad started doing it, this was at the very beginning of this. So please, and thank you again so much.
Sure. At extreme altitude, like on the summits of like K2 and Everest, I think you're probably I think it's about somewhere between 1/3 and 1/4 of an atmosphere. So there's not a lot of oxygen. So you have to be very fit. So I train quite a bit to be able to do that and do that safely, to get up and get down and not get so exhausted that you can't get yourself back down. I mean, the most important thing, we have 3 rules when we go to the mountains. Rule number 1 is that you have to come back safely. Rule number 2 is that you have to come back friends with all of your partners. And rule number 3 is you get to the top. And in that order, so we try to make sure that when we're going up that I think of it as like, I guess the analogy I always use is like a bank account. All of the training and the preparation and everything that you do before you go on a climb like this, it's like putting money in the bank. It's like your savings account. And then when you are on the mountain and you're using up energy, it's like withdrawals from your account. And the idea is when you get to the summit of the peak, you still have enough balance in your account that has enough there that you can get down before your account goes empty. Because a lot of people you read about now, they get to the summit, but when they get to the summit, they're empty. There's no money left in the account. They don't have any energy to get back down. And so then these are a lot of the people that you read about that end up becoming casualties in the mountains because they didn't have enough energy to get back down. So you always have to kind of gauge where you are with that. The way that it feels when you're that high, best I could describe it is that everything is slowed down, because your brain doesn't work that fast and you move very slowly, you think very slowly. So then you have to again be careful because your thinking is a little bit not like it usually is. You're not as sharp as you are. So if you're going to make a big decision, you got to be very careful about that because it's easy to make a bad decision because your brain's not working that well. It feels to me like sometimes just kind of like this, a little bit of a mesh, like a translucent screen is like pulled over your brain so that you're just not thinking quite as clearly and as quickly, and mostly just more slowly. So it's kind of a cool feeling in a way, but it's one that you have to. It's like this strange drug, but you have to be very careful about it, and by the time I started getting to the tops of these peaks, I had experienced it a few times, so I knew what I was doing, so that's another thing that's important is experience, so that, you kind of know that you've left enough money in the bank.
The simple question is, this is hard stuff. Why do you do it?
Why? Oh, I really like it. Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean training? Yeah, oh yeah, I probably train, I probably train about 20 hours a week, plus or minus, and I do kind of a combination of cardio, so I try to run up trails or cycling with a lot of hill training because that's where you really get your heart going. And then I do a lot of climbing. I try to do a lot of, rock climbing and training in gyms for being able to pull down and keep my arms strong. How high is K2? K2, I think, I don't remember the exact number, but I'll be pretty close. It's 28,250 feet, I believe. It's over 8,000, about 8,500, 600 meters, something like that. I'm sorry? Oh yeah, all these mountains are growing, yeah. Maybe a couple centimeters every year or two. Yeah. What does it sound like? Usually the wind. Yeah, just the wind blowing. It's always windy. Yeah.
How long did it take to climb it?
Like K2?
Yeah.
Well, the whole trip is probably 2 months because you have to get used to the altitude and everything. But at the time when we're ready to go and we start at the base camp and go to the summit, on our summit push, it took 4 days. What's the highest mountain I've climbed? Mount Everest. Because that's the highest mountain in the world, so you can't climb any mountains higher than that because it's the highest. Oh, hardest. Oh, no, I don't know. Some mountains, aren't that high, but they're very steep, so they're quite difficult. Those Laytok peaks are probably some of the hardest climbs I've done. K2's not that easy. That tower we did at the end, that was pretty hard too. That's very steep rock climbing.
What do you eat when you're
What do we eat? Well, we kind of have two different kinds of food. We have base camp food and we have mountain food. And the base camp food, we eat the local foods. So we eat what Rasul and Nadim were cooking for us there. Sometimes they make rice and lentils or a curry or, these kind of things, When we're on the mountain, it's usually kind of like crackers and cheese and energy bars and tea and that kind of thing.
So what was the toughest mountain you climbed?
What is the toughest mountain I climbed? Is that right? Okay. Well, all of those mountains are kind of tough, and they're tough in different ways. Some of them are high, so it's hard to breathe. Some of them are not as high, but they're very steep, so it's very technical. So they're all kind of tough.
When you were climbing, why didn't you keep on going when it was hard to breathe?
Why did I keep going when it was hard to breathe?
No, why did you came back? Why did you stop from climbing? In some cases you came back.
Oh, sometimes we come back without getting to the top, and there's lots of reasons for that. Sometimes it's because I was explaining before, I didn't think I had enough energy to get up and get down safely. Sometimes the weather would get bad. Sometimes I have problems with a partner, do you have a problem with a friend sometimes when you're playing out on the playfield and you're playing with somebody and all of a sudden they do something to you that you don't like and then you say to them, I'm not going to play with you anymore? That happens in climbing too.
I had two questions. I was wondering, how much does one gas station cost?
It varies a lot. I could talk all night about that. Well, like the trip we did to Pakistan last year for the three of us, which is a complicated trip because, anyway, that trip probably cost about $27,000, including airfare. No, for the whole thing. Yeah.
The second question I had was, so I understand the training part. How do you train for a really high elevation, like above 14,000 feet in the atmosphere? How do you train for that?
Well, I think that here, because we're kind of at sea level, I just train to be really cardio fit. But once you get there, you have to acclimatize to the elevation. And that takes for a big mountain like K2 or Everest, that takes me about 3 weeks. Why what?
There are stones in the mountain.
Yeah.
Stones in the mountain.
Yeah.
So how do the stones form? And
Why are there stones formed? Well, then you can take, you'll be a young geologist in the making here. I can see that right now. All these mountains in South Asia were formed by, millions of years ago. The big plates hit each other and they pushed the rocks up to make the mountains. And the mountains are still growing. So there's two questions. I'm not sure I understood that.
The first question is technological advancement. What is the technological advancement in the last 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
That you felt was most beneficial?
Like what the changes in climbing I've seen in 20 years, the advancements. Uh-huh. And what was the other one?
Kept you going in the hardest moments.
Okay. What kept me going? I mean, probably the biggest changes in the last 20 years is equipment. The equipment's gotten a lot better. It's gotten a lot lighter. You know, the equipment we used 20 years ago was way heavier, and it's amazing the gear that we've got now. So you can climb so quickly and without so much weight, and so you're able to do a lot more. And I think with that, you know, people have learned a lot more they've learned how to train and technique, and just like most sports, you know, there's advancements over the time as more people do it. What keeps us going, I think, is just, you know, if you want to go climb, if you go there and you put all this energy into wanting to climb the peak, you have a lot of desire to get up there. So for us, there's a lot of, you know, it's like you want to finish the race. You know, you want to complete the project.
Thank you for coming. Really enjoyed the talk. I have a question about once you get to the summit, how much time do you spend there? What do you do when you're up there? And what are some of the rituals that climbers perform on the summit?
Well, and I think he had a question here too. Then, you had a question, right? I thought you had a question, and I'll answer. I'll just be next. I'm going to answer his first. I usually have a turnaround time because a big part of being safe is to, you know, in the morning I'm like, okay, I've got to get to the summit by 2:00. Because if I get there later than 2:00, there won't be enough time for me to get back down before it gets dark. And so if it's 2:00 and I'm still an hour from the summit, then I go back. You know, so how much time I spend on the summit depends on how close I am to the turnaround time. So when I got to the summit of K2, I was 4 minutes from my turnaround time, so I spent 4 minutes there, and then I went down. When I climbed Everest, I was maybe 2 hours ahead of my turnaround time, so I spent maybe a half hour there. So that usually governs how long I stay. No real ritual, you know. It usually kind of depends on the weather. If there's, like when we got to the top of Sasser Kangri 2, it was a beautiful day, and there wasn't a breath of wind. And so we hung out there, and we were well ahead of our turnaround time, so maybe we spent an hour there, you know, just looking at the view and enjoying it. Well, you know, probably the longest planning is the permitting, because all these peaks, because I kind of was showing they're all in politically sensitive areas, the permits to go there are they're hard to get. You have to apply to the government to get them, and it's a long bureaucratic process for them to issue the permits. So we often have to, like I'm planning a trip to Pakistan for this next year, and I'm applying for the permits now. So it's usually a 9-month, usually ahead of time, that I'm actually starting the work on it.
Arranging the people and the park, you must be doing a lot of research on the park and
Oh yeah. There's a lot of information that you can do. You know, the American Alpine Club publishes a journal, the American Alpine Journal, that documents everything that's significant that's been climbed every year in the world. And those journals get published every year. For American Alpine Journal, has been published over 100 years. But then the Indians have what's called the Himalayan Journal. Japanese have one. So there's lots of places you can go for research.
We've got about 3 minutes before Nisha, which is the 90 graders, and I've got 3 kids and 3 flight others for questions. So why don't you guys, if you think about the question that you asked, we'll take one up and click on my kids, and then we'll close the program. And then Steve, probably if you want to take a few more minutes,
Sure.
we can ask some questions as well.
Okay. The question's about all the trash and what happens with it. Yeah, I mean, the routes that I was climbing on these peaks aren't commonly done, so we didn't have a lot of that kind of trash. There have been cleanup expeditions on at these various different base camps, but certainly the climbers could do a better job and with Leave No Trace for sure. That's a really good question. You have to melt the ice with a stove. Because when you're up that high, there's no water. It's too cold. Everything's frozen. So if you want water to drink, you have to melt the ice with a stove.
Do you find any animal on mountains?
Sometimes birds. And up in the Dio side, they have the Himalayan brown bears. Yeah, there are small animals, but very high on the mountain, you don't see too many animals because it's too cold.
Did you get stuck in any storms?
Lots of times you can get stuck in a storm, and so that's why you have to be prepared with enough food and supplies to wait out the storm and then be able to go down when the weather is better.
How many mountains did you climb, or is this the only one?
Oh, I don't know how many. I've been climbing for almost 50 years. I've climbed hundreds, maybe thousands of mountains. Yeah, I don't know how many. Too many. But maybe I should say not enough.
Thank you very much. Very technical question. Done Rainier, Sai, training here, not planning to go from Everest, planning on Mount Denali, actually almost Kennedy. Is it a good investment to invest on a tent, chamber tent, pressurized tent for training?
Oh, I know. You mean these like altitude tents?
Yes,
Yeah, I know some people that use those. I don't know really. I've never used one myself. I know some very experienced people who use them. Yeah, yeah.
So, at what age did you start climbing your mountain?
14.
All right, so prayers will start in a few minutes. I think based on the number of questions you have from kids, you clearly gained their attention and held their attention. So we do hope that from those kids we might find, some folks who will follow in your footsteps. So thank you so much for coming. Let's see if a big round of applause again.
Did he have some, yeah, you have something to say?